This is an ABC News special report. Now reporting, George Stephanopoulos.
Good day. We are coming on the air because President Trump about to enter the diplomatic room of the White House and announce that he will formally recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, ultimately move the U.S. embassy there from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. It is a controversial decision, already sparked protests across the region and condemnation from the Arab world and U.S. allies who believe the status of Jerusalem should be settled in peace talks between Israel and the Palestinians. Many U.S. presidential candidates have promised to make this move. President Trump, the first to follow through. I want to bring in our senior White House correspondent, Cecilia Vega. And Cecilia, first and foremost, that is how President Trump sees this, a promise kept.
Exactly, George. And I'm told by aides here that he actually wanted to do this much sooner than today. But he learned when he took this job, you can't snap your finger, as one aide told me, and move an embassy. He has been under immense pressure to make this move from evangelicals, from pro-Israel groups, frankly, from some very big donors as well. But even if the embassy doesn't open anytime soon, and this is expected to take years, this White House is going to paint this as a campaign promise fulfilled, George, perhaps even at the expense of the peace process.
That is the political situation at home. I want to bring in our chief global affairs anchor, Martha Raddatz. Already, you've seen our allies in Europe, in the region, condemn this move. They say it is going to be dangerous. It's going to spark protests, complicating the peace process.
It certainly will, George. Whatever peace process there is right now, whatever peace initiative there is right now. Of course, Jared Kushner has been working on this. I think this is a signal that things aren't going very well with that peace initiative. We haven't heard very much about it, and I'll toss it back to you, George.
President Trump entering with Vice President Pence, the diplomatic room of the White House.
Thank you. When I came into office, I promised to look at the world's challenges with open eyes and very fresh thinking. We cannot solve our problems by making the same failed assumptions and repeating the same failed strategies of the past. Old challenges demand new approaches. My announcement today marks the beginning of a new approach to conflict between Israel and the Palestinians. In 1995, Congress adopted the Jerusalem Embassy Act, urging the federal government to relocate the American embassy to Jerusalem and to recognize that that city, and so importantly, is Israel's capital. This act passed Congress by an overwhelming bipartisan majority and was reaffirmed by a unanimous vote of the Senate only 6 months ago. Yet for over 20 years, every previous American president has exercised the law's waiver, refusing to move the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem or to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital city. Presidents issued these waivers under the belief that delaying the recognition of Jerusalem would advance the cause of peace. Some say they lacked courage, but they made their best judgment based on facts as they understood them at the time. Nevertheless, the record is in. After more than 2 decades of waivers, we are no closer to a lasting peace agreement between Israel and the Palestinians. It would be folly to assume that repeating the exact same formula would now produce a different or better result. Therefore, I have determined that it is time to officially recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. While previous presidents have made this a major campaign promise, they failed to deliver. Today, I am delivering. I've judged this course of action to be in the best interests of the United States of America and the pursuit of peace between Israel and the Palestinians. This is a long overdue step to advance the peace process and to work towards a lasting agreement. Israel is a sovereign nation with the right, like every other sovereign nation, to determine its own capital. Acknowledging this is a fact is a necessary condition for achieving peace. It was 70 years ago that the United States, under President Truman, recognized the State of Israel. Ever since then, Israel has made its capital in the city of Jerusalem, the capital the Jewish people established in ancient times. Today, Jerusalem is the seat of the modern Israeli government. It is the home of the Israeli parliament, the Knesset, as well as the Israeli Supreme Court. It is the location of the official residence of the Prime Minister and the President. It is the headquarters of many government ministries. For decades, visiting American presidents, secretaries of state, and military leaders have met their Israeli counterparts in Jerusalem, as I did on my trip to Israel earlier this year. Jerusalem is not just the heart of three great religions, but it is now also the heart of one of the most successful democracies in the world. Over the past 7 decades, the Israeli people have built a country where Jews, Muslims, and Christians, and people of all faiths are free to live and worship according to their conscience and according to their beliefs. Jerusalem is today and must remain a place where Jews pray at the Western Wall, where Christians walk the stations of the cross, and where Muslims worship at Al-Aqsa Mosque. However, through all of these years, presidents representing the United States have declined to officially recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital. In fact, we have declined to acknowledge any Israeli capital at all. But today we finally acknowledge the obvious, that Jerusalem is Israel's capital. This is nothing more or less than a recognition of reality. It is also the right thing to do. It's something that has to be done. That is why, consistent with the Jerusalem Embassy Act, I am also directing the State Department to begin preparation to move the American Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. This will immediately begin the process of hiring architects, engineers, and planners so that a new embassy, when completed, will be a magnificent tribute to peace. In making these announcements, I also want to make one point very clear. This decision is not intended in any way to reflect a departure from our strong commitment to facilitate a lasting peace agreement. We want an agreement that is a great deal for the Israelis and a great deal for the Palestinians. We are not taking a position of any final status issues, including the specific boundaries of the Israeli sovereignty in Jerusalem or the resolution of contested borders. Those questions are up to the parties involved. The United States remains deeply committed to helping facilitate a peace agreement that is acceptable to both sides. I intend to do everything in my power to help forge such an agreement. Without question, Jerusalem is one of the most sensitive issues in those talks. The United States would support a two-state solution if agreed to by both sides. In the meantime, I call on all parties to maintain the status quo at Jerusalem's holy sites, including the Temple Mount, also known as Haram al-Sharif. Above all, our greatest hope is for peace, the universal yearning in every human soul. With today's action, I reaffirm my administration's longstanding commitment to a future of peace and security for the region. There will, of course, be disagreement and dissent regarding this announcement. But we are confident that ultimately, as we work through these disagreements, we will arrive at a peace and a place far greater in understanding and cooperation. This sacred city should call forth the best in humanity, lifting our sights to what it is possible, not pulling us back and down to the old fights that have become so totally predictable. Peace is never beyond the grasp of those willing to reach it. So today we call for calm, for moderation, and for the voices of tolerance to prevail over the purveyors of hate. Our children should inherit our love, not our conflicts. I repeat the message I delivered at the historic and extraordinary summit in Saudi Arabia earlier this year. The Middle East is a region rich with culture, spirit, and history. Its people are brilliant, proud, and diverse, vibrant, and strong. But the incredible future awaiting this region is held at bay by bloodshed, ignorance, and terror. Vice President Pence will travel to the region in the coming days to reaffirm our commitment to work with partners throughout the Middle East to defeat radicalism that threatens the hopes and dreams of future generations. It is time for the many who desire peace to expel the extremists from their midst. It is time for all civilized nations and people to respond to disagreement with reasoned debate, not violence. And it is time for young and moderate voices all across the Middle East to claim for themselves a bright and beautiful future. So today, let us rededicate ourselves to a path of mutual understanding and respect. Let us rethink old assumptions and open our hearts and minds to possible and possibilities. And finally, I ask the leaders of the region, political and religious, Israeli and Palestinian, Jewish and Christian and Muslim, to join us in the noble quest for lasting peace. Thank you. God bless you. God bless Israel. God bless the Palestinians. And God bless the United States. Thank you very much. Thank you.
President Trump there closing his remarks in the diplomatic room with a plea for peace and calm in the Middle East as he signs those papers. After placing himself in the tradition of Harry Truman, the first U.S. president to recognize the state of Israel, President Trump becoming the first American president to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, putting his signature on the pages right there. It says eventually, after planning, he will move the United States Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. I want to bring in our chief foreign correspondent, Terry Roman, for more on this. The president also says this is just a recognition of reality. Jerusalem is the capital of Israel. He's saying it's also the right thing to do. Where it might not be a recognition of reality is his point that this does not signal a departure from the peace process. That's not how our allies in the Arab world see it.
And not just our allies in the Arab world, George, all around the world. Look, no country in the world has their embassy in Jerusalem, and now the United States will if this process continues. Ask yourself why. The reason is because every country in the world has for decades recognized how dangerous, how intensely emotional, how profound an issue this is. Sacred ground for three of the world's major religions. And so not only does this put the United States out of step with Arab allies or European allies, but it does put us out of step, put the United States out of step with leaders around the world because it nullifies the possibility of negotiation on this process. He says that he's still open to a two-state solution, but Palestinians who also believe that Jerusalem is their capital now feel that conversation has been closed. And the United States really got nothing for giving away this concession in these negotiations. It is a unilateral step that is out of step with countries around the world.
It was a full-throated articulation of the Israeli position there. I want to bring in our chief White House correspondent, John Karl, as well. John, I think there's a little bit of an analog to the president's approach to domestic politics here as well. Strong supporter of Israel during the campaign, strong supporter of Israeli Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu. He's focusing on his core supporters.
And focusing on keeping what was a core campaign promise. I mean, he promised, like many Republican candidates in the past, he promised that he would recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, that he would move the U.S. embassy to Jerusalem. And now he is following through, at least with the first part of that. Now, George, he did hold back a little bit. He said he's going to begin the process of studying and moving towards moving the embassy. If he had wanted to go further, he could have. There is a U.S. consulate in Jerusalem. That could be immediately christened to the embassy. He stopped short of that. And to Terry's point, I think the way the White House views this is there still is negotiation on this point because the White House is not ruling out the possibility of a Palestinian state having its capital in Jerusalem as well, having its capital in East Jerusalem. So this is not as far as he could have gone. And the White House is trying to say they are leaving open the peace, a peace process here. And
they're saying it could take actually years to move the embassy as well. Let me bring back our chief global affairs anchor, Martha Raddatz. Right at the top of his remarks there, Martha, he said that old challenges need new approaches. What we didn't hear in those remarks is any enunciation of what that new approach might look like overall.
Exactly, George. And basically he left it as if this is the only reason we didn't have a peace agreement before by declaring Jerusalem the capital. I also have to say that it's a big world out there. This isn't just about domestic politics. And we are at a place in the world where there are so many conflicts still ongoing. You look at Iraq, it's a time we're trying to stabilize Iraq. And look at North Korea. So I think a lot of people, a lot of our allies, a lot of people in the Arab world as well are saying, why now? Why throw flames?
I want to go to our correspondent, James Longman, in the region, in Israel, right now in Jerusalem, right there. And James, the president called for calm in that statement as well. But this is a tense region now.
George, it absolutely is. And what people here will be looking for is some clarity. Donald Trump made no mention of the words East or West. He just said that he thinks that Israel should have a capital city, and that should be Jerusalem. So I think people here, Palestinians particularly, will be looking for some clarity. Many people here didn't really believe that Donald Trump would make this sort of statement. There was some disbelief here. So I think as the realization really starts to sink in of what this could mean, because don't underestimate the symbolism of this, President Donald Trump standing up and saying this for the first time, the United States saying something like this, that kind of symbolism, that kind of message to the Middle East and to this region especially could mean trouble. So for the moment, Palestinians just taking it in, but I think it could mean trouble as the week goes on. George?
Okay, James, thanks very much. Let me go back to our senior White House correspondent, Cecilia Vega, for her final word right here. Jared Kushner, as Martha said, has been the president's point person on this Middle East peace process, but he just said he's going to be sending the vice president to the region.
Yeah, George, and I was struck by the positioning of the vice president during the president's remarks there, very prominently displayed right behind President Trump's, perhaps a nod to the evangelicals here and the concession that the president is giving them by doing this. This was a big campaign promise, and he has faced a lot of pressure from pro-Israel groups and evangelicals, namely, particularly Sheldon Adelson, that big Las Vegas casino magnate, a huge donor to the president, who was very unhappy when President Trump signed that waiver 6 months ago. The White House says that was part of the pressure that this president faced. He has to sign the waiver again. He did not want to sign it without looking like he was not following through on that campaign promise. But it remains to be seen, George, going forward, what really will happen with this. There are no plans in the works right now to build that embassy. So we will see whether this happens under President Trump tenure or someone else.
Dramatic move today from President Trump. He is becoming the first American president to announce that Jerusalem, formally recognized Jerusalem Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. As you just heard, he also says eventually he hopes the United States will move the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Our coverage is going to continue online. Of course, much more tonight on World News with David Muir. And you can get the latest breaking news alerts anytime by downloading our ABC News app. Have a good day.
This has been a special report from ABC News.
I'm Ron Claiborne in New York. We're just leaving that special report with George Stephanopoulos, where the president announcing that the U.S. will officially recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel for the first time, the U.S. taking that position. And joining me here is Rick Klein, the political director of ABC News. Rick, can you explain succinctly the political and diplomatic significance of the step that the president has just taken? You saw him there signing the papers, recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel.
There's hundreds of years of history and 70 years of American history that goes behind this. But the bottom line is that the Israeli government has long maintained and treated Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. The Palestinian people, though, also consider it to be a capital. So the reason that American presidents have been hesitant to embrace that reality is that this is such a volatile region. And, of course, the United States is viewed as a potential broker in Middle East peace. There have been many attempts in the past. The president, by all accounts, has been frustrated by the fact that he couldn't be more clear, because previous American presidents have said, yes, we will make Jerusalem the capital, we'll have our embassy there, but they have not acted on it. They have looked at the political realities, and now the President Trump is saying, forget those political realities. I'm going to try something different. I'm going to scramble things in a big way. It is a risky move. It is a bold move. It is a move that fulfills a campaign promise, but it has lots of consequences we can't even imagine.
Okay, and joining us now, our senior global affairs correspondent, Martha Radich. Martha, in the special report there, you raised the question, I guess rhetorical or not, why now? Why is the president taking this step now?
Well, it certainly has a lot to do with domestic politics. And when you look at what's happening overseas, what's happening in this peace initiative with Jared Kushner, I don't think much is happening. But I really was struck by how strongly he said no one's ever done this before. Presidents have promised to do this. No one has ever done this before. No one has ever declared Jerusalem the capital. He's exactly right, and no one has an embassy there, and the world is alarmed by this. So he left this impression that, hey, if I just declare it the capital, then we're going to have a whole new kind of peace initiative going on here. And I think you will have a peace initiative going on here, which is about 10 steps backwards from where it was before. He also called out for young, moderate voices to come forward. I'm not sure this is the kind of call those young, moderate voices will answer.
And Martha, before we let you go, the president said his words that this move was in the best interests of the U.S. and the pursuit of peace between Israelis and Palestinians. How do you figure he figures that?
I got to tell you, Ron, I do not know. I will say that it's exactly as we were just saying. It's a bold move, that's for sure. But it's a move that I think most analysts and certainly the rest of the world right now does not think will bring any sort of peace initiative. In fact, most of them believe it will bring violence.
Okay, Martha Radich, thanks for that. And let's go to Cecilia Vega, who is our senior White House correspondent. I believe you're on the steps of the White House now, or else a background that looks like the White House. Cecilia,
it's the real White House.
It's the real White House there. Cecilia, what was the calculation here in the White House? The president could have done this 6 months ago. He could have waited another 6 months or later. Why do you think he's doing this now?
Well, I'm told, Ron, that he actually really wanted to do this essentially right out of the gate. We've been talking about this all morning. This is something that he campaigned strongly on. And there was some frustration there that he couldn't do it sooner. We've said this a lot with a number of issues with this president. He's learning on the job. He's new to politics. He's new to Washington. This is one of those issues that falls into that category. I'm told by people close to him that he wanted to do this sooner. He realized that you can't just snap your finger, as one aide told me, and move an embassy. So there was some frustration there with the process and the amount of time that it took to get here. That is one part of this. Certainly, there is an immense amount of pressure on this president to make this move. Pressure from pro-Israel groups, pressure from evangelicals, pressure from some very big donors. Sheldon Adelson in Las Vegas, that casino magnate who had donated tens of millions of dollars to support Donald Trump, was very upset the last time that this president signed this waiver to extend the embassy in Tel Aviv. So now he is facing real-time decision to have to sign that waiver again. And this White House tells me, aides here tell me that he didn't want to sign the waiver without making it look like he was doing something to at least start to move toward that process of fulfilling this campaign promise.
And quickly, one other question, Cecilia. The president consulted with a number of allies, foreign governments in Europe and the Middle East. There was apparently unanimity. Don't do this. What did the president say back to them when they said this is a bad idea?
And he's got another call with Palestinian Mahmoud Abbas right after he wrapped this speech. I'm told that the White House aides here will be on the phone on the other side of this with evangelicals and pro-Israel groups later this afternoon to really try and hammer this message home. The message from this White House has been, and I think it's going to be really hard to justify going forward, that this will help with the peace process. But we have heard Palestinians time and time again over the last 24 hours say that the peace process is destroyed because of this move that the White House made today, Ron.
Okay, Cecilia Vega, senior White House correspondent, reporting from Washington. Thanks for that. We're going to go now to Molly Hunter, ABC News correspondent, who is in Jerusalem now. Molly, has there been any reaction to this expected move during the day? And if you can look into your crystal ball, what do you expect to ensue over the next 24 hours or weeks?
Crystal ball, that would be nice,
Yeah.
Ron. We actually just got a statement from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who said this is a historic day. It's been the capital of Israel for nearly 70 years. He talks about Jerusalem has been the focus of our hopes, our dreams, our prayers for 3 millennia. This is exactly what Netanyahu wanted to hear tonight. But Ron, I will say, President Trump didn't go as far as Netanyahu would have wanted. We didn't hear the words undivided capital. We didn't hear the words eternal capital for the Jewish people. We didn't go as far as the right wing here, and many Israelis would have liked to hear. He just said Jerusalem. He never said West Jerusalem, and he also never said East Jerusalem. I think Palestinians and President Abbas would have really liked to hear him say actually just West Jerusalem, but he kept that open. Now, during the details at the very end of his statement, he talked about the status quo of the holy sites. He said the U.S. is not taking a position on a final status issue. But then his next sentence was that Jerusalem is one of the most controversial, of the toughest, the thorniest issues. So to not take a position on one of those final status issues, but to do this is, I think, going to be really, really confusing for many Palestinians to try to work through how that's not, how that doesn't make sense and how that doesn't contradict for them.
And Molly, it's Rick Klein here. I wanted to pick up on that point. How realistic is it to say that this decision doesn't prejudge future decisions? It strikes me that this is actually a critical piece that the president is essentially giving away to the Israeli side. Is it viewed that way on the ground? Is it viewed as that big a concession?
I think people here are wondering two things about the why now question. Is this a one-off? Did Trump really just do this to play to his base for all the reasons that we just heard from our White House correspondents? Or is this part of some grand strategy? Actually, did he promise and did he talk to the Israelis behind closed doors and have the Israelis agreed to some serious, meaningful, valuable concessions to the Palestinians? I think that's what we'll see in coming days. Actually, maybe there is progress. Maybe this was something that the U.S. gave the Israelis. The Israelis actually possibly have things to give back. But I don't think in Ramallah, I don't think President Abbas is going to see it that way tonight.
Molly, there's been some thought that this could trigger certainly demonstrations, possibly violence in that region. Are the Israelis braced for that? Is the U.S. Embassy braced for that possibility?
The State Department has warned all U.S. embassies and consulates in the region to brace specifically for that. The Israelis are absolutely braced for that. The Israelis are used to and very good at dealing with kind of protests of this nature. Now, look, it's 9 o'clock almost here in Jerusalem. You can see it's dark out. It's even later, of course, in the rest of the Middle East, in those Arab states to the east. So I don't think we're going to see anything tonight. But what we're watching for is this reaction on the ground tomorrow. Now, we have heard from Palestinian factions. They did call for 3 days of rage today, Thursday and Friday. Tomorrow's an unknown. But guys, Friday is where our focus is at. Friday is the biggest prayer day. That's when the most Muslims pray in those Friday afternoon prayers. You'll have imams, you'll have preachers speaking to large communities of Muslims. Because, guys, as we've talked about, this is not just a Palestinian issue. This is not just about the Palestinian-Israeli domestic conflict. This is about Al-Aqsa. This is about Jerusalem. And Al-Aqsa and Jerusalem are important for the entire Muslim world.
Molly Hunter reporting from Jerusalem. We thank you for that. We're going to go next to Terry Moran, our chief foreign correspondent. I believe you're in London, Terry. I got a question, a basic question for you. Where are the prospects for a peace process now? Where are we at?
Well, look, it's always been a long shot. That the light at the end of the tunnel seems to get farther and farther with every passing year and every changing of the facts on the ground by the Israeli government that has built settlements on land that, as recently as President Clinton's effort to broker a peace deal, was supposed to go to the Palestinian nation that was supposed to arise out of those negotiations. So right now, it just looks right dark. I got to tell you, because for all the politics that we've been talking about, this isn't about politics. It is, at bottom, about faith. And maybe that's the most powerful force in human history, about the Jewish faith, certainly. Also about the Muslim faith and the Christian faith. The patriarchs and leaders of the Christian churches in Jerusalem came out today and said this would do irreparable damage to their community. They live there. They know what the score is. And so, to look past what was going to be a very difficult period, perhaps a very destructive and violent period as people absorb this change, which even if it's only symbolic, look, in faith, symbols matter a lot. I'd look to Saudi Arabia. I think when President Trump talked about young, moderate leaders, he may well have had in his mind the crown prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, who is essentially running that country as his father cedes power to him and liberalizing much of what's going on in Saudi Arabia. I was just there. There's women are going to be able to drive and lots of other kinds of he wants a moderate Islam, in part because he sees Saudi Arabia and Israel can make common cause against the country they both think is their ultimate enemy, Iran, and that means they've got to solve the Palestinian issue. So it may be that with this, the United States steps back from its central role. Whatever envoy the president sends over there, his son-in-law, his vice president, and that they're going to try to make a deal in the region themselves. But I got to tell you, calming down the Palestinians who through their faith and through their history believe that Jerusalem is their capital too. Anybody who's been there sees that Jerusalem is a great Jewish city and a great Muslim city. And to deny that is to deny the facts of its history and the faith traditions that are born there or developed there and now conflict there.
Tara, you used the word irreparable in reference to this move. Molly Hunter pointed out a moment ago that the president didn't go quite as strong as maybe Netanyahu or the Israeli government would want to go in just flat out declaring Jerusalem to be the capital. We know that the embassy move is at least 6 months away. There's still a lot of things that have to happen before that happens, maybe even a change of administration, depending on how long this takes. But is the view that this is some kind of a threshold that you can't turn back from, that this forecloses final status negotiations, that this forecloses the possibility of fully hearing out the Palestinian side?
Yeah, it doesn't, I think, in President Trump's mind. He's a deal maker. He thinks there's always room for more deal making. The problem is that by signing on to the Israeli government's and the conservative Bibi Netanyahu's government's understanding of what Jerusalem is, which I know that Molly says he didn't say West Jerusalem or East Jerusalem, he didn't define it, but essentially he is signing on to what the Israeli government is doing, which is they annexed East Jerusalem. 420,000 Palestinians live in East Jerusalem. When the Israeli government annexed it, those people did not become citizens of Israel. They are essentially treated as foreign immigrants, permanent residents who have no right, despite the fact that they and generations before them were born and raised in Israel, in Jerusalem. They've got no right to citizenship. By signing on to a project that is viewed by them, by other Palestinians, and by much of the Arab world as an attempt to seize Jerusalem, that will delegitimize America's role in future talks, no matter how sincerely President Trump, Jared Kushner, Vice President Pence want to say, hey, you can still have a capital there, can't they, Israel? And Israel's going to say, no, it's our capital, and we've changed it and annexed land and built settlements and changed the nature of it, which, by the way, to be fair, that's the history of Jerusalem. Whoever wins it changes it. It was a Christian city for a while. It was a Muslim city for a while. Now it's a Jewish city, an Israeli city. And everyone who gets it gets the right to change it. And that is what is happening year by year, month by month, decade by decade. And President Trump just signed on to that project, whether he acknowledges it or not.
Terry Moran in London, always nice talking to you. Appreciate that your insights and perspective on this historic day. I'm going to go now to Nathan Sachs, the director of the Center of Middle East Policy at the Brookings Institution. Let me get your take on the repercussions of the move that the president has taken. John Brennan, the former CIA director, said that this was a reckless move and would destabilize the Middle East. What do you think?
I think this is a classic case of something that is, in theory, obvious. Jerusalem actually is the capital of Israel, and extremely unwise. We don't know what's going to follow. We could hope that it's relative calm, that there'll be demonstrations. They blow over in a few days. But as he said, we could be seeing much worse than that. What the president did now is bring in one of the most emotive, thorniest topics, the powder keg you don't want to touch, and brought it front and center into the peace process just when everyone is waiting to hear the peace plan from the Jared Kushner, Jason Greenblatt team. And just at that moment, we brought in this religious issue that has scuttled the peace process in the past. For example, Camp David in 2000, it was the most difficult issue. To bring that back in, make this again about religious emotions, is going to be very difficult. The president tried to qualify it very strongly. As Molly said, he didn't say undivided Jerusalem, he didn't say united Jerusalem, he just said Jerusalem. He even said for the first time that he'd accept two-state solutions, although he again qualified it if that's what the parties wanted. He said also that this does not say anything about the borders, the boundaries of Israeli sovereignty. So we just heard the issue that perhaps it includes East Jerusalem. He said basically it's open to negotiation and that the borders would be open to negotiation. But all that is nuance, and nuance is exactly what is lost when you bring in religion and such an emotive, explosive issue back into the middle of negotiations. I hope that not too much happens. This blows over. We'll hear a lot of complaints from all across the world, certainly the Arab and Muslim world. We've already heard some. We're going to see demonstrations. I hope that's it. But I fear that we may be risking much, much worse.
At this moment, on December 6, 2017, are there any realistic prospects for reviving, resuscitating peace talks, a peace process here?
Well, peace talks you probably can have. They may have to be quiet. You may have to somehow give something to the Palestinians so they come back to the table. They're going to have to placate a very, very angry domestic audience right now, and also an international arena that's harder for them in the Arab world. You may be able to get talks, of course, but the point, after all, is not talks. The point is to reach actual peace. And there, I hope I'm wrong. I've been wrong about many things. I hope this is one of them, but I don't see a chance for peace right now.
Okay, Nathan Sachs from the Brookings Institute, thank you very much for joining us. We're going to go back to Jerusalem for a final word from Molly Hunter, who's there monitoring the reaction. What's the Israeli government saying, if anything, about this?
We did hear from Prime Minister Netanyahu almost immediately after that, and he was overjoyed. He said this is exactly what he had wanted to hear. This was a tribute to the great lasting relationship and the enduring relationship of the American presidents and the American government and the Israeli government. And actually earlier tonight, about an hour ago, Ron, we saw the mayor of Jerusalem, a Jewish Israeli, Nir Barkat, put up the American flag and the Israeli flag on the walls of the old city to make a statement to say we are incredibly good friends. And that flag didn't stop necessarily in East Jerusalem. Those flags were huge on the west, on the old city walls here in Jerusalem. I do want to say one thing about what Terry and Nathan kind of both talked about the prospects of peace, because we will hear from Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas later tonight, almost imminently, I think in the next kind of 15 minutes. Trump's speech may, for Abbas sitting in Ramallah, that may have been it. That may have been the last straw. He may say, you know what, I may actually break ties with the U.S., and he's been threatening to do that. But if he doesn't, what this does for Abbas is it gives him an automatic, a go-to excuse to walk out almost at any time. Talking to analysts here, all of a sudden, if things start to go south, if those talks ever get restarted, this gives Abbas an excuse. And I think that's really important to keep in mind as President Trump tries to get both sides back at the table.
You said Mahmoud Abbas is going to speak in a short while, live, I believe, on television. What do you think is likely? I know you don't know yet, that he will be saying.
I think there are two things that we should watch out for. He's been saying that the PA, the Palestinian Authority, may cut ties with the U.S., and he's been saying that this is the end of the peace process. Now, there is no process right now. There hasn't really been a process for a while. So saying that you're not going to continue in the process may be a lot of talk for his base, actually. Cutting ties with Washington, he could. Abbas doesn't have a lot of options. He's a weak leader. He's an old leader. He's fairly cornered, but he just might. If he doesn't see the U.S. as an honest broker after this speech, after this statement, he might actually cut ties. And if there was an issue that would force Abbas to cut ties, it might be Jerusalem. Would he look elsewhere? Would he look to Russia? Would he look to China for brokers? Possibly. So this could actually really backfire if President Trump still really wants to be the guy that gets this grand deal done.
Molly Hunter, thank you for that. I'm going to turn, as we begin to wrap up here, back to Rick Klein, our political director. How does this play here in the U.S. domestically? We've heard a number of perspectives that this will be accepted happily by the Trump base. Who are they? Why do they want this? And what about the rest of the U.S. constituency?
We are seeing glowing reviews for this move from evangelical leaders, from prominent Jewish leaders, especially more right-wing Jewish leaders. There was a reference earlier by Cecilia Vega to some prominent conservative Jewish donors for whom this is a threshold issue. You have to say you're going to do this. Evangelicals, many of whom view Jerusalem as the eternal home of the Jewish people, have also been very, very adamant about the need to support Israel and to support the idea of Jerusalem. It's also been an interesting partisan issue because, as President Trump referenced, this has been technically the law of the land for some 20 years, under Democratic presidents as well as Republican presidents. Presidents Clinton and Obama and President Bush all said they wanted to do it. Many members of Congress, who typically would be very critical of President Trump, actually have to say, you know what, this is the policy that I supported before and would support in Israel. Some of them are questioning the timing. But I'm struck, Ron, by how classic this is as a Trump move, in that it drops a little pebble without a plan for what happens with those ripples and not knowing exactly how far they go. That, to me, is that disruptive quality. The fact the president says, look, it hasn't worked before, so I'm going to try this instead. It's a valid point to make that there was no peace process to even destroy by making this move, but that's kind of the point. We're nowhere on that, and this would seem to put us a step back from that. And he's got to trust in his own deal-making abilities to try to put these pieces back together, but this is a heck of a gamble in a very volatile region.
Rick, can we pivot to another story that I imagine is going to be even bigger in the next 24 hours, the fate of Minnesota Senator Al Franken? A number of senators, female senators, and others coming out today saying that Al Franken needs to resign. Where is this headed?
We're at about 24 senators now, including some male senators, but the majority of the female senators, I believe. Also, the chairman of the Democratic National Committee calling on him to resign. It is a coordinated effort to push him out, which is a striking departure from the effort to rally behind him and around him that's dominated since the stories first broke. I think in part it's driven by new accusations, new revelations, but I think more broadly it's a recognition of this cultural moment, this societal moment that we're in. The contrast with Republicans who have rallied behind Roy Moore, the RNC re-endorsing him, President Trump offering that endorsement as well, I think could not be more stark, and I think that's one point for Democrats. I think it's even bigger than that, though. I think Democrats are realizing now, look, we cannot say that we stand in solidarity with the women who say that they've suffered at the hands of powerful men without showing by example that there is accountability. And the fact that John Conyers, the senior most member of Congress, House or Senate, happens to be a Democrat, resigned his seat this week, that's the beginning of that accountability. And there have been several senators, Al Franken's colleagues, who've come out just in the last few minutes and said their expectation is that Senator Franken resigns his seat tomorrow. And
you also mentioned, we were talking earlier, that Time magazine naming the women who have spoken out against sexual harassers being the person of the week in Time magazine. That could even be a factor here, huh?
Several senators have cited that. And I think it gets, again, to how this is bigger than politics. This is a cultural moment. You've seen titans of media and entertainment. It's far beyond our elected officials this has reached, and it's reaching into the conversations that every American has. The poll numbers have been striking about how many women say that they have suffered from some sort of harassment or even assault. And I think it's recognizing that. And until frankly, this week, when Conyers resigned and now the calls for Franken to resign, it's been striking that so few political figures have been held to account. They've been able to say, well, there's an ethics process and we'll let that play out. Due process has not been afforded to many other people that have been accused, and I think many people would view that as the right way to do it, that you can't question the words of these women and the overwhelming mass of evidence that emerges.
Is there any realistic scenario under which Franken survives this?
I can't see it. I don't know how you can have this many of your colleagues in your own party, not to mention the chairman of the Democratic National Committee, all calling on you to go and you somehow stay. There's been some speculation about him maybe taking a leave of absence. I think the time for that is gone, though. I think right now the writing is on the wall for Senator Franken. And again, seeing his colleagues with their expectation that he resign, I don't know how he has another option tomorrow.
One last question for you, or commentary, really. So we could end up with a scenario under which Al Franken, accused of serial sexual harassment, loses his Senate seat, but the candidate in Alabama, the Republican candidate for an open Senate seat, despite accusations of having sexually harassed or had relations with underage girls, wins that Senate seat.
Yeah, and I think there's a tendency to false equivalencies in this story. What Franken is accused of doing is not what Roy Moore is accused of doing, which is not what Donald Trump is accused of doing, or John Conyers. They're all separate, and they may all be deplorable in their own way, but they are separate issues. However, that is exactly the contrast, I think, from a crassly political point of view. Democrats who realize this is a bigger moment than they can potentially harness, they realize that women are frustrated and angry. Many of them are running for office now for the first time, citing this sort of treatment endemic in society. And I think they're looking at this and they want that contrast. And whatever happens in Alabama next week, I don't think is going to be impacted by Al Franken in Minnesota and whatever his decision is. But I think Democrats would like to say, look, when we had a problem in our own ranks, we did something about it. Look at what the Republicans have done and use that as a voter to make a judgment.
When I say last question, there's always one more last question.
I know that. I know that gig,
This
Ron.
is the real last question. If Roy Moore is elected to that Senate seat in Alabama, will the Senate hold ethics hearings which theoretically could lead to him being removed from that seat?
Yes, although I think the theory is really only that. I don't think they can really functionally do anything about it. I think the view of the overwhelming majority of Republican senators is going to be, look, these issues were litigated in the campaign. The voters of Alabama knew about the allegations. This was a front page news every day for the last month of the campaign. And if they vote for Roy Moore, they've decided they either don't believe the allegations or they don't care. And they still want him to represent them in the Senate. So, yes, I think that they are boxed in, the Republicans, in having to hold ethics hearings. They have said so publicly. But in terms of expelling him from the Senate, assume that all 48 Democrats are on board for that, or 47 if Franken resigns. You still need to get 18, 19 Republicans to cross the party.
You're not going to get that, are you?
I don't think they're able to say, I don't care what you just said in Alabama. I'm going to kick you out of the Senate because I, as a senator, don't think you belong. That's a tough argument and a slippery slope, and it may be that Republicans are stuck with them.
A lot of big news today. Rick Klein, thanks for your perspective on all of it. And again, just wrapping up very briefly, the President of the United States, Donald J. Trump, announcing today that the U.S. will be recognizing Jerusalem for the first time as the capital of Israel. First time this has happened, notwithstanding, since 1995, there has been legislation passed by the Congress of mandating that recognition. The president signing a waiver which will prevent that from that move from happening anytime for the next 6 months. But he says eventually the U.S. will build a new U.S. embassy in Jerusalem. Very controversial. We'll see the reaction coming in the next hours, certainly days and months. Thanks for joining us.